Association. Please come on in, get a seat. Also known as the Friends of Land Between the Lakes. If you don't know what this organization is, we're basically a nonprofit. We actively partner with the Forest Service to help support LBL. So we host activities where we, like this one, like this environmental education speaker series, we're trying to get more people to come to LBL. We also fund a lot of the interpreters that you might have encountered either here or at Woodlands Nature Station or at the home place. We also really pursue funding for a school field trip grant program that every year brings hundreds of kids to LBL. So today it is my absolute pleasure to have John Hewlett with us. John is a full-time instructor at Murray State University in the Department of Biological Sciences. His area of expertise is basically wildlife ecology, disease ecology, and conservation. But he particularly focuses on the ecology of venomous snakes. Why? I have no idea.
Just one.
So what he's going to talk with us about this afternoon is what he refers to as our misunderstood neighbors. So rattlesnakes that you may or may not have already encountered in LBL or in the surrounding areas. So John, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm going to come up here.
Okay. John did ask if we could kind of hold questions to the end of this presentation, and then we can have a real festive
we can do a lightning
Q&A session.
I was originally going to stand up here, but there's more people here today than I thought we're going to be here. So normally the snake talks don't get a big crowd. So anyway, yes, I'm John Hewlett. I'm a full-time biologist at Murray State. I teach a variety of classes, wildlife disease ecology, I teach herpetology. And today I'm going to talk about some of the more what a lot of people would consider unloved members of our natural community out there. So I've kind of titled my talk, misunderstood neighbors, because they are a bit misunderstood. First, I've got a question, and I'll take a show of hands on this one. How many people here are afraid of snakes? Be completely honest. Okay, all right. That was a delay there, which was kind of interesting. If I do my job right today, hopefully I can convince you, right, that that's unwarranted in most cases. But fear is a very powerful motivator, right? Most of our stories that we have, go back where snakes are ultimately the villain, right? Perseus cut the head off Medusa. These are ancient stories that we have. To go back to prior to the Roman Empire. Snakes have not done well in the modern press either, okay? So, case in point, these issues of man's life, which is no longer published, seem to feature a common theme. And they tend to involve some kind of, heroic male saving a woman from the onslaught of rattlesnakes or an anaconda, or, in this case, here's another one. I think the one on the far left may be a sequel to the one in the middle, so you can see a recurring theme there. Does not paint them in a positive light. But, truth be told, if we're being real, the turtles really didn't get away unscathed either. So, something as harmless thing as a turtle, right? These are the stories that we tell ourselves. Here's the bottom of it. The next question I'll have after mentioning, or asking, who's afraid of snakes is this fear actually justified, right? And that's kind of the nitty-gritty of what we're going to talk about. So I'll let you kind of meet your neighbor. Two species of rattlesnakes live in land between the lakes. My graduate research was on one of them, which is the timber rattlesnake, which will take up the bulk of today's talk. We also have a very, very small, diminutive little species called the pygmy rattlesnake. Very, very rare. Been working on a project on private land on those for about 3 years. would like to extend to LBL. We'll see how it goes. They're definitely here. All right, so this is one of your native predators that is here, right? And there it is. That female right there was one I put a radio transmitter in. We nicknamed her Eileen, right? And she's pregnant with a bunch of pups in that picture, right? There's another one, and we nicknamed him Charlie. Somebody asked me at the end why I did this. And the bottom line is these animals are very shy, right? They are not aggressive. And we can have a discussion later on as to what constitutes aggression versus defensive behavior. And I'll kind of go into that. And this will come back up again. The important thing to understand here is that these things are vital to ecosystem balance. All puzzles have pieces. And for that puzzle to be complete, all the pieces must come together, right? And this is a piece of that puzzle that we have here locally. It's what I refer to as an irreplaceable component of our natural heritage, right? Which is the timber rattlesnake. Why do we fear it? And I will let you shout at me this. Why? What unnerves you about these animals? In particular, you can shout, yell. It's fine. You don't want to get bitten, presumably because they contain venom, right? Which that can ruin your afternoon, right? That's for sure, right? 100%, right? And that tends to put people off tremendously. They have rattles, right? You get a couple of different opinions on rattles when it comes to rattlesnakes. Some people find the fact that snake is rattling its tail to be very offensive. Okay. Other people think, oh, it doesn't really bother me. Because a rattlesnake, unlike other snakes, will let you know that it's in the, yeah, there you go, warning, got it, nailed it. That they can warn you with the rattle, right? Our snakes don't do that very much, and we can kind of talk about that too in the Q&A. I'll let that come back up. The other thing is stories that you've been told, right? And so I think about my two kids when they were little. A lot of what we do is primed. So they would take a bite out of their food, sneer at it, then hand it to me and say, here, try this. Well, I'm not trying it, right? They've already displayed to me that there's something wrong with it, right? And I think a lot of people feel this way about snakes. They've been told, you know, this animal's dangerous. This animal can hurt you. This can put you in the hospital. It can kill you in the worst of circumstances, right? Or somebody had a negative interaction. And we see this time and time again where one person throwing a snake at another person when they're a kid can have lifelong repercussions, right? If you go person to person to person to person, somebody's had a negative interaction, right? Well, yeah, that's why we tend to fear it. I'll come back to this later, okay? But first, I want to talk about what threats they face, right? And then we'll get kind of into the nitty-gritty of this. I'm looking out there. I see several people who have had me for class. I've got 2 people in here that's had me for herpetology. There's one of them right there. Everybody will be happy to know I'm in storyteller mode today. I am not in scientist mode, so you will not have to look at one graph, not one single graph. But these animals, pardon me, these animals are in deep trouble around the country, right? So if you look right here, this is the current range of the timber rattlesnake. Let's hit the laser. Up in the Kentucky bluegrass region, right? There's no rattlesnakes. There probably were at one point in time. We're not really sure why they're not here. Far into Texas, we used to have timber rattlesnakes over there. Plenty of other species here besides timber rattlesnakes, and then you can kind of see the green. That's misleading. That would lead you to think that they are everywhere, and they're not. They are in these tiny, tiny, tiny little isolated pockets within that green. And what has caused their decline, right? Well, the big driver is habitat loss, right? Fragmentation, not necessarily the same thing. So fragmentation is when habitat's been split by a road and fragmented, so the animals can't cross back and forth across the road without getting hit by a car. This is straight up habitat loss. So if they have nowhere to go, right, they lose out, they don't reproduce, you don't get what we, the biologists, refer to as recruitment. They don't contribute to the next generation. Right? And the other thing with rattlesnakes that you see is this business right here, which is, we call it direct persecution. Direct persecution is when they are specifically targeted and killed. And in the Northeast, there used to be bounties on timber rattlesnakes. Now, The problem that I see, especially as it comes to having these stories passed down, is we have this thing that you've probably heard of called social media, where these things run rampant. It's almost like a mind virus where these things spread. So one person posts a picture like this and it goes completely viral. Here's a fun fact about this picture. That snake looks huge. That guy's like, I really killed this, right? I'm going to tell you that this animal right here is every bit of 2.5 to 3 feet long. So if you really look closely at the picture, what he's got it out on the end of a long stick, aiming it directly at the camera, right? That snake is tiny. It is not huge. We could reenact it, you know, that's called forced perspective. If you're a fisherman, you know exactly what I'm talking about with the picture, right? That crappie, that world record one that you caught, why does your hand look remarkably big compared to your head in the photo, right? So that's direct persecution. This is what I have worked on. It doesn't involve direct persecution. Maybe related to habitat fragmentation and habitat loss, but bottom line is this. There's a new threat on the landscape that can affect these animals, okay? It is cleverly known as snake fungal disease, right? A lot of effort went into describing it that way. Here's the bottom line. It's weird with snake fungal disease. Who in here, show of hands, has heard of white nose syndrome in bats? Anybody heard that? So, white nose syndrome was first described in 2006. All right? Snake fungal disease was also, interestingly enough, first noticed in 2006. They are not related at all. That was just a big year for fungal pathogens in North America. It was originally found in a den site in New Hampshire. Those animals did not do well, and when the researchers found them, they looked like this. And what had happened was their face had been infected. This has no effect on people, has no effect on mammals, has no effect on anything that's snake. It is snake specific, right? What happens is when you see a fungus on the landscape mushroom, you're mostly looking at what we call the fruiting body. What you don't see in the bread bowl is the fact that it sent projections into the bread. What it does is it infects the snake's face, sends projections in there, and essentially eats the snake's face. So the snake can no longer hunt with this going on, and this was deeply problematic. It's not as bad as we originally thought, as it turns out the population that was hit super hard in New Hampshire was extremely inbred, so there was not a lot of genetic diversity within that population, and they died very, very rapidly. We don't see that same type of mortality really anywhere else but up here. And there's reasons for that, and it has to do with the fact that their active season is so short. Summer in New Hampshire is very, very short, and then they go back into a cold wet hole over the winter, which is just very, very conducive to that fungal threat. And that's what causes it. That's the microscopic photomicrograph of the Ophidiomyces fungus that results in this pathology. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I did, right? And then we'll go back to the other component of this. Come from a medical family. The only person in my family is not in the medical family. Okay? So like any well-adjusted person, I decided I wanted to spend my graduate school studying 5-pound rattlesnakes, right? That's what I did. So I would capture these animals. This was in 2018. I had an operating room on the second floor of the engineering building, and I would bring these snakes in, and I would surgically implant them with a radio tag that I could follow them around with. How many people are from around here? Do y'all remember seeing this on social media about 5-7 years ago? It definitely made its rounds. I would release them back right into the wild, and then I would go look at, sample them to see if they're infected with the fungal pathogen, and draw some hormone samples, and this is what I did. So I spent my summer tracking them down right here on the ground in various places over here. My side job is I'm also a fixed wing and helicopter pilot, so we had actually tagged so many animals that I could no longer keep up with them. So I would put some poor undergraduate in the co-pilot seat of the Cessna, and we would attach the radio Yagi outside, and I'd run the wires through the window and go on my little tracking runs in the evening so I could track them down. There's the Edgar Sherry Bridge. I'm on my way back to Murray Airport. And once we go, I'm sorry. This is Nick Deans. He was one of the field techs that saved my bacon. This is when we learned that Nick does not like flying. A good friend would have said, "Hey Nick, are you okay?" But I decided to take his picture instead with his emotional support vomit bag on the tarmac of the Murray Airport. Interestingly enough, he lives in Iowa now, and last week he was tracking landing turtles from an airplane up in Iowa. So apparently things have changed. Okay, then we go back out, recapture the animals, right? Once a month, I would draw a blood sample on them. I would look at their hormone profiles to see what was going on with their immune system. We check them over for parasites, test them for fungal disease, right? Enter my data, everything was hunky-dory. We very safely handle these animals. I put them in tubes, some business ends, Brianna didn't, she's my technician. Business ends up in the tube. Same situation here. This is about a 5-pound rattlesnake, heads up in the tube. There's Nick again doing a swab. Caught that snake on the Egner's Ferry Bridge at 11 o'clock at night. That should shock you. So I was driving home that evening, and I was tired. My mind saw something that I didn't really process, and I thought, there's no way, there's no way, there's no way. I drove to Aurora. I did a 180. I came back. Sure enough, there's a huge rattlesnake right on the Egner's Ferry Bridge. 11:30 at night. I jump out. I've got my bucket. I've got all my tools. I was like, I'm going to get away with this. No one's going to see it, right? It's nothing wrong. I got a permit. Here comes a car. And they drove by, and when they did, their eyeballs were about this big. I think if Elvis had gone by riding a unicycle in a clown costume, they would not have been more surprised by what they saw that night on the Egner's Ferry Bridge. And then we would look at what rattlesnakes like over here, and we do these habitat assessments, and we go out and get a lot of ticks. So if you spend much time hiking around LBO, you know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to ticks. I've contracted 2 tick diseases myself doing this. And then we go out in the middle of the winter. I take these flagging tapes out there, and we figure out where they spent the winter, and I run these endoscopes down in their holes and check on them to make sure they were doing okay. And it's kind of hard to see in this light, but there's the body of a rattlesnake inside its den in about the middle of February. We're waiting for emergence to happen. Kind of an interesting phenomenon. And what we're learning is this, is that a lot of them are infected with this, and a lot of them get rid of it. They go through these kind of shed cycles. They come out infected, then they shed it off, and then I can't detect it anymore, or couldn't detect it anymore. And then they kind of move on, and we do this next year. So the disease impact from this varies from location to location to location. If you're in the Northeast, it's much more severe than it is here. And that kind of plays into the nature of LBL as a whole. When you drive up the trace, you go from Stewart County up to Lyon County, right? You don't get to see, it's deceptive, right? LBL is huge. I mean, until you've flown over it with an airplane and actually look at it from the air, you don't realize how massive it is and how lucky we are to actually have it. But there's a lot of gene flow here in these animals, right? And so they kind of come in and out, right? But the fact of the matter is, these healthy ecosystems improve resiliency, all right? And they're very important, and this is a very important component. There's another one, I nicknamed this one Neil, right? There he is coiled up at sunset. Over here, those are some long hot days. Okay, so what good are they, right? And this is where I make my pitch. This is not a native snake. This is a pit viper in Africa, or it's a puff adder. It's a puff adder, and it's not a pit viper, it's a true viper. It's a puff adder. And what they found is that the presence of these puff adders on the landscape improves agricultural yields in Africa. There's no reason to assume that that wouldn't be the case anywhere else, because unlike mammals, when you get an influx of rodents, these things can eat far more than their body weight annually, right? With each city, we call it factorial scope, okay? So a mammal can only increase their intake so much, but a cold-blooded animal can just eat and eat and eat and eat when the times are good, and then when the times are bad, they can go a long time and not eat anything, right? So whereas mammals have to kind of maintain a constant intake, right? So they can prevent property damage, right? And they're part of a balanced food web because they too are prey items for predators. So I don't pick favorites. If I happen to be walking across the field and I see a red-tailed hawk carry a rattlesnake off, I'm like, that's pretty cool, right? That's just as much the ecosystem as anything else, right? I'm not pro one or the other. But I will tell you what I am pro. Okay, so here's this, right? So over here is what's called a petechial rash on the palms of the hands. This right here, you may know it as a bullseye rash. The technical term for that is erythema migrans. This person has been bitten by the wrong tick. This person has been bitten by the wrong tick. This is what's called a rickettsial infection, and this is straight up Lyme disease, right? And we know that those are tick-borne illnesses that can be transmitted to people. Here's the bottom line. What's going on out there with the ticks, and how does this relate to the rattlesnakes? Okay, so there's a huge misconception as to how these diseases get spread. So there's your classic tick. We've got dog ticks, black-legged ticks, and Lone Star ticks here, all three of which can carry SAP, okay? What we've been seeing is this. So this is not here, all right? It kind of looks like they're more thin. But what we see is people like their lawns, right? And so they fragment all of this habitat up and they create all this edge habitat out there. It's not necessarily a bad thing if it's managed properly. But then we see an influx of deer. They're not a problem either. The problem is right here, and they use this right here, uses this to breed on. This doesn't carry disease, that does, okay? This is where they meet up, okay? This is where your online date becomes a person, right? Okay? That's the main platform. What does carry, what acts as a reservoir for the diseases these carry are rodents. Okay? Particularly this one right here is notorious for carrying this, right? Nothing wrong with it. I'm not anti-rodent, okay? I don't pick sides, but the rodents are what we refer to as a competent reservoir host for these bacterial rickettsial infections. Competent host means the rodent carries the bacteria but does not show any sign of illness itself, right? It's largely unaffected, doesn't even know it has it. But when that bites a rodent, it picks it up from the rodent and then transfers it to you. And that's where the problem starts. And like I said, it's happened to me twice, right? It has no clue that it's even a player in this, right? But when those things molt, and go through their instar phases, and then they find a person, it can become a problem. So what does it matter? Well, Karen Lips at the University of Maryland has shown through modeling that timber rattlesnakes are probably inhibiting the transmission of tick-borne diseases on the landscape to people. And why is that? Well, because they are highly efficient at removing these competent reservoir hosts right here that contain the rickettsial bacteria. What's kind of interesting about this situation was, in any fecal samples I did, there was tick larvae in the fecal sample that had probably come off the rodents that I didn't get to eat, right? Anytime this goes through a snake, it cannot end up harming you in any way, shape, or form. Now, show of hands really quick. I'm going to do the math in my head. Who in here is afraid of snakes? Who doesn't like snakes, afraid of snakes, whatever? Who dislikes ticks more than snakes? Bingo. All right, now we're getting somewhere. All right, so you can kind of see where I'm starting to go with this, right? So human health and wildlife health is deeply connected, all right? So what good is a rattlesnake, right? Well, it's pretty good for this, okay, in particular. But what about harm from a rattlesnake? Well, the reality is you're far more likely to be injured by a vending machine than you are a rattlesnake, okay? That's what the math actually shows, right? If you look at the vending machine injuries per year, it's not even close. Let's define what constitutes an accident, okay? So you'll hear this over and over again to vilify these animals. Well, somebody could have an accident, right? So I define an accident as a person is going along, minding their own business, not doing anything, right? And all of a sudden they become bitten by a venomous snake and this causes a tremendous level of problems for them. They have to go to the hospital. Does that happen? Yes. Does that typically happen around here? No. Does that happen in California where they have a lot of urban sprawl and they're kind of going out into the desert? The rattlesnake population is a lot higher. They're getting into carport, right? Yes. More common out there, still very rare in North America. Now, let's define what doesn't constitute an accident. What doesn't constitute an accident is you're on a camping trip with your buddies and somebody sees a venomous snake around the campfire and says, hey, watch this, and goes and picks it up, right? Not an accident. Now, which one of these do you think is more likely to happen? Walking along, minding your own business. Which one?
Walking along, minding your own business.
Oh, let's try people picking them up. That's where the accidents typically happen. All right. So let's talk about the mortality statistics associated with snake bite deaths. Very, very low in the U.S. They do not represent a public health threat here. In the developing world, India in particular, where you have a lot of the weight of the human population, if you don't have doors on your house, right, and this becomes more of a socioeconomic thing than a biology thing. If you don't have doors on your house, if you have rodents coming in and out of your house, and you have snakes going in after the rodents, and you're sleeping on the floor, and you roll over on a cobra in the middle of the night, this becomes deeply problematic. If you are engaging in agrarian farming practices, but the population has difficulty affording footwear, right, and then you step on one with a bare foot, this is a problem. This doesn't tend to happen in North America. What about the state of Kentucky? There has been 6 snake bite deaths in recorded history that we can find in the state of Kentucky. All 6 were timber rattlesnakes, right here. But all 6, every last one of the 6, 100% of them, all were within snake handling churches in Appalachia, so they had actually draped a venomous snake around their neck, right? Or they picked it up. And so in this case, right, it can become problematic. Now, the reality of the situation with the timber rattlesnake, and I'll just go to the snake handling church situation, is how is it that there's only been 6 snake bite deaths, even with that practice going on? And that has to do with the particularly docile nature of this species right here in particular. Do not pick one up. It can be catastrophic if you do, but they tend to be fairly reluctant to be aggressive under normal circumstances. So they kind of get away with that. But the snake bite deaths are very low, right? I'll come back to this, okay? This is one of my favorites because I did research on cottonmouths too, right? During the Q&A, somebody remind me about this, right? Do cottonmouths chase people? Short answer to that. All right, I'll give you the long answer of what's really going on here in a few minutes. Just remind you, right? And it just kind of comes back to this defensive behavior does not equal pursuit. It's a different story, right? But the bottom line is when it comes to risk from venomous snake bites, right? The vast majority of venomous snake bites are happening because someone's trying to handle the snake or they're trying to kill it. There was a case down at Center Hill Lake, 2017. Firefighter was out canoeing with his family, saw a timber rattlesnake on the bank, got out of the canoe, tried to kill the snake. The snake bit him, and I believe he did not, I don't think he survived, actually, that, right? And it would have been a lot better situation for everybody involved if he had just stayed in the canoe and taken a picture of the animal. But that was not an accident. You cannot categorize that as an accident because he was deliberately trying to handle it. Okay. And then the last part of this talk, I'm going to tell you about some of the natural history components of the species itself, right? And why I think the kind of studies that I've done are really important, right? Well, some of the observations we had were basic natural history observations. John James Otto, he's been up to Henderson, Kentucky. They got a state park up there, and right? He's a big bird, big ornithologist, painter, artist, right? And he painted this, my favorite, one of his, I think it's plate 42. I think it's plate 42. I may be wrong. It was called Mockingbird, and he had a painting of a timber rattlesnake in a mockingbird nest, and he was completely berated for this. Everybody said, "What are you talking about? Everybody knows timber rattlesnakes don't climb trees. Everybody knows that timber rattlesnakes don't eat birds. What are you thinking, JJA?" Right? And he was completely chastised for his painting. Well, as it turns out, the timber rattlesnakes do climb trees, actually. So this was a female that I had that was radio transmitted. I'll show you in a moment what she did while she was up there, but it's kind of interesting. She's up in Scarlet Oak. And as far as them not eating birds, well, as it turns out, they will actually eat birds. So what we got going on here is that's a female eastern toady, which is a songbird. And so it turns out, John James, I don't think he knew about this, but this was not actually that far off to reality. Okay, so what's going on? So you've heard the saying, don't step over a log until you look on the other side of the log. Well, that's a timber rattlesnake thing. The reason why people say that is because these rattlesnakes use their sense of smell to determine where prey items run along these logs, right? Their whole world is olfactory. They're terrorizing. Absolutely terrible, right? They can't hear. They don't have any external ears whatsoever. They can detect vibrations, which is why they put their little chin up there on that log. But most of what they do involves the sense of taste and smell. So this animal crawled up this log, knew darn well what was going on when it came to squirrels, using that as a run, and set up an ambush site, and puts the chin up there to allow it to detect the vibration when a squirrel does hunt across the log. And then sometimes they'll go to the base of a tree. Sometimes they know exactly on the tree where the squirrel is going to come down, right? So they can detect its trail coming off the trunk. And they will set up an ambush site right at the base of the tree. And this one's tail is kind of wrapped around this right here. Whoop. Keep hitting the wrong button. Its head's up on the tree right early in the morning, about 6 a.m. Squirrel comes down, and the last thing it sees is a big white flash right at the bottom, and it's permanent nighttime time at that point, right? And they all tend to do this, right? So it's kind of neat. This is a completely different snake. This one probably weighed about 5 pounds again. He's radio tracked. I tracked him to his place. He'd set up shop right at the base of the tree, and he would wait for a prey item to come down. And, okay, so in this case, this is going back to the one that ate the bird, right? So I don't know what was actually going on here, but it had this log set up, and I presume that it was actually trying to attract squirrels, which is why it set up the ambush site. But I think it's pretty unfortunate for the toady, right, that it just happened to perch on the wrong log at the wrong time. So I thought, well, I don't know, we documented that species being eaten by rattlesnakes, so I tried to publish it. And I did get it published because I shut down one of the reviewers really quick. And they said, well, how do you know that it didn't just scavenge a dead bird? Well, I don't know. I mean, most of its body's on this side of the log, and this bird's over here. But the smoking gun in this crime was the fact that if you look right there, you will see drops of uncoagulated blood that is still wet. So that blood had not yet dried. This had literally gone down within minutes of me arriving on the scene. So it
eat on the ground.
yeah. So toadies eat on the ground, and so he plunked that toady, right? And you kind of see it there, and you can see the uncoagulated blood. I was like a forensic investigator. Right? Okay, and there it is from the side. And you still see it. Right? And that one snake that I showed you that was up in the tree, Grad suit and I were out there one day and we walked around, and I looked, and I'd been consistently tracking her to scarlet oak trees over and over and over again. And I can already tell you my next video is probably not going to work, but we're going to get through it. She loves scarlet oaks for some reason. And so I found her on the ground one day, and I thought, well, she's been up there for like a week and a half, 2 weeks, I don't know what's going on. And she looked really, really velvety and clean. And I looked at the grad student and I said, we got to go back to the tree. And he said, what? And I said, I think she's shed up there. And we got underneath the tree. Sure enough, I looked at her to see her shed skin. So she decided to climb a tree and stay up there for 2 weeks before shedding her skin up in the tree. Same snake, different tree, still a scarlet oak. And this was a little bit unnerving because I was tracking her through the woods that morning. And I got a stronger signal and a stronger signal and a stronger signal. I'm like, why am I getting this strong signal? And I'm looking around and I'm looking around and I'm looking around and I'm looking around. And finally I looked right in front of me at eye level, and she was perched up on that branch. Which is fine, because she did absolutely nothing. She remained perfectly still. And I'll just talk about that for a second. So, Eastern Diamondback rattlesnakes, I've done research on those in Jekyll Island. Long time. Timber rattlesnakes, all of your eastern, southeastern species that live in a forest, right? There's always a trade-off. There's always a trade-off with behavior. And they have really, really good camouflage. And so the trade-off with them is it pays to sit still. Don't do anything. Don't move, don't make a sound, don't do anything, okay? Eastern diamondbacks are exactly the same way, right? The only time that I've ever seen any timber rattlesnakes really rattle, without me trying to, take a blood sample or something like that, because they most certainly will then. But the only times I've ever seen one give a warning is if it happens to be crawling across the ground when I encounter it. So it's very vulnerable and it's very stretched out, and at that point the trade-off is it's probably better to let you know that I'm here. But if they're coiled up on the ground, they don't really rattle. You can walk right by one, ask me about it when this is over, I'll tell you a story about that, but they don't really rattle. The trade-off was she didn't make a noise. Now, go out west, where everything is very open, in those arid desert landscapes, and the trade-off is the reverse. It pays to let you know what's going on. Last two slides I think I've got here. It's at Tennessee National Wildlife Refuge. I found a postpartum female. You can see the babies in the background back here, and there was a male present, and when male rattlesnakes get into it with each other, they do this thing called combat, where they wrap themselves around each other and try to force the other one's head down to the ground. This snake tried that with me. So it did not like the fact that I was there, right? And I guess because I was upright, it thought that I was a rival rattlesnake. I don't know if I had the scent on my boots or whatever, but he pulls this stunt right here like he wants to engage me in male-to-male combat. Just like I'll let you guess which one of us won that round. I did not participate, so I forfeited that round.
You ran?
I didn't run. I would never do that. Didn't run. Kind of backed up a little bit and said, you know what, I'll tell you what, fella, you win, right? So we're living in interesting times right now, right? So we're at a planetarium. I've been coming here since I was a kid. Somebody remind me in a minute about the names. In the next 2 weeks, we're going to get to see the second moon launch. This would be the first one in my lifetime. I was born in 1982. Okay, so Artemis 2 is going to launch. When they do, they're going to come around the backside of the moon and we'll see the Earth. So on Christmas Eve, 1968, Bill Anders, Jim Lovell, and Frank Borman went around the moon. They came around the backside, and we're not expecting what they saw. What they actually saw was us, and that was the Earth rising above the lunar landscape. And for the first time in humanity's history, right, we got to see the blackness that we're surrounded by, right? And this kind of kicked off, concerns about the environment in the late 60s, what we humans were doing to it. And it kind of showed us that we are kind of isolated, right? There's not a lot out there, right? You've got this stark gray lunar surface. Shortly after this, Rachel Carson published her book, Silent Spring, right? And we're going to get to see that again here in probably the next 3 weeks. And I hope it does for this generation what it did for the last one when we came around and saw that, right? The takeaway message with this right here is this, as it pertains to rattlesnakes, is I don't care if you're from between the rivers. I don't care what, on this continent, between the rivers, on this planet, right? We are all in it together. And that includes rattlesnakes. That includes all of these things that you think can hurt you, right? They're all integral components to the ecosystem that we have around us. And understanding these things definitely replaces fear, right? In other parts of the world, these things can have devastating consequences, but like I said, it's mostly socioeconomic issues, right? If you don't have shoes, it becomes problematic, especially in the developing world. Here, it's not such a big deal. And I hope at the end of this talk that you kind of come away with a better understanding of the benefits that these things provide us in terms of ecosystem services. Like I've said, you're more likely to get hurt by a vending machine than you are a rattlesnake, right? But what they're providing in terms of the possible reduction in tick-borne disease transmission to people, it's hard to put a monetary price on that. I mean, that is a major public health benefit that we have. And with that, I would like to thank you all for coming to my talk today and hearing about rattlesnakes. And I like talking about rattlesnakes. So I don't know how much time we've got left here, but I will take questions, and here's the thing. When I leave, I'm going to go out there, so if you're shy and you don't want to ask a question in here, you can hit me up outside. I'm more than happy to talk with you about this as long as you would like. So, thank you all. The lightning round begins. Yes, sir.
The Cottonmouths have a 3-mile road up in Shawnee, and
They do.
do rattlesnakes have the same?
So you're talking about LaRue Pine Hills, aka Snake Road, or as I like to call it, Cottonmouth and Frog Road. So there are timber rattlesnakes up there at Snake Road, as a matter of fact. But the majority of what I see at Snake Road are cottonmouths. So yeah.
Do they, I guess what I'm asking, do the timber rattlers migrate? They come out of the hills?
So we found at LaRue Pine Hills in the same hole. So it's shining lights in there. There'll be a rattlesnake cozy up next to the cottonmouth. Yes, ma'am.
So you said that a lot of the infected snakes actually can heal.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm curious kind of how that works as it is like a skin degenerative disease.
They shed theirs, we don't.
What about when their eyes come into play?
So I've seen them with ocular scale retention, which is one of the characteristics of it. It's pretty unusual.
Okay.
Yeah, and not only that, if they retain once, that does not mean that they'll retain the next time, and the next time, and the next time, and eventually I think that crust kind of builds up, and it's like, it'll shed that one time and off it goes. But I did find a cottonmouth that had a retained eye scale at Tennessee National Wildlife Refuge in October, and it was pretty funky. Hopefully he's okay. So, yes.
Have you been bitten?
I knew that was coming. I have not been bitten by a medically significant venomous snake. I am incredibly careful. I have been bitten by some rear-fanged venomous snakes in Central and South America, and it hurt and it bled a lot, but it was not a life-threatening situation. In terms of one of these, I use these tubes, and we have a specialized way to get in the tube. Anybody that wants to be a cowboy and pin their head down is asking for trouble. Do not recommend that, right? That was the old school way of doing it, and we have better methods now that are much safer. So, and I hope to never be bitten by one. And I tell my technicians when we go out and catch them, I'm like, I don't want my heart rate going up 1 beat a minute. I don't want my blood pressure up. I want this to be really, really boring, and we're going to make it really boring. And that's the way I like it. So, yes.
What was the conditional statement you were going to make regarding cottonmouths and cheese?
Okay, so okay, so here's the thing. I'm from, okay, but full disclosure. So I don't know if anybody's from Marshall County, but I did this study over on the refuge back in like 2008, okay? And we put in like 5,000 pit tags on cottonmouths at Clark Sugar National Park just like 15 years ago. And we jokingly said, like, you know, if anybody was going to get chased by a cottonmouth, it was definitely going to be us, right? It didn't really happen. What people see as this pursuit behavior is this. These are not splitting the atom and doing calculus. I love them, but they're not smart, okay? So they know where the water is, though, and if you happen to be in between them and the water, they're more than happy to go right between your legs to get to it, right? And so if you're on the other end of that, that actually looks like, oh my God, that thing's chasing you. Now, the other thing that happens is, like I said, they don't have any ears. Their eyesight is terrible. They set themselves up like this, coiled up and ambush, right? So they don't put any, they don't expend energy developing eyes and ears, okay? So they do detect vibrations. So I was out with my dad one day, this is like 2018, I saw a cottonmouth on the side of the drainage ditch, so I went down to the edge of the drainage ditch. No one's going to do this, by the way. And I noticed the cottonmouth was now coming across the drainage ditch and swimming towards me. And I realized I had made a ripple in the water. Okay? And so I sat there, don't do this, but I sat there, I sat there and I was like, let's see what it does, right? And it got to about 1.5 feet, and at a 1.5 foot range, it could all of a sudden see me now. And it stopped, and it was like, I made a mistake, right? And next thing you see is it like does a 180-degree slow turn, right, and leaves, right? So they will come to things that are vibrating in water, right? And once they realize it's not a struggling frog, right, they really don't want any part of that anymore, right? Yes?
Outside of Belleville, in this area, how common are they? I mean, copperheads are everywhere.
How common are rattlesnakes?
Yes, how common.
I don't know. So I think the population within the land between the lakes is probably very, very small. But I also think that's a testament to how huge it is. And like I said, you can't really tell from a car. But when you get in a little airplane and go fly over, they'll know it's a big place. I think at one point in time it was the largest inland peninsula in North America.
Are people seeing them outside Belleville?
I get calls, and then I show up, and it's the usual suspects that are not actually rattlesnakes every time, because almost all species will wiggle their tail in the leaf litter and make noise. So I'll get called over, and I'm like, that's a king snake, or that's, whatever it is. What we got?
How do you know if the snake is venomous or not?
How do you know if the snake is venomous or not? That's a really good question. So, the one thing that people say again, it's like, well, you can tell because they got a vertical pupil, and it's kind of dark in here. But that one doesn't have pupil. Like, what are you going to crawl down there and look? No. So, the best way to know that it's a venomous snake is to understand what the patterns on their back look like. And here's the thing. If you see one, you're going to know. But we're getting towards the time of the year where I'm about to get inundated with text messages that say, is this dangerous? And it'll be a picture of a snake. And I usually respond with, are you touching it? And if they say no, then I say, then it's not dangerous. And they say, well, what is it? And I'm like, it really doesn't matter, does it? If you're not touching it, it's not dangerous, right? And that applies to any of them. But the best thing you can do is know what their patterns look like. Best thing you do, don't, if there's any doubt in your mind, do not touch it, right?
Can you still track the ones with the
No, that is over, sadly. That was a bittersweet. I had, that finally came to an end, and I had contracted enough tick diseases at that point, and so that, I think my last radio tracking on that was in 2022, so, yeah, so it really was bittersweet, because I enjoyed what I did, but I can tell you right now, the 110-degree heat index and LDL in the middle of July is not a lot of fun anymore. So, what we got? Oh, how do I never get bitten by a snake? I'm just very, 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 very curious.
Any other questions?
What's the key difference between
key differences in terms of.
Just habits or?
Oh, okay, yeah. So your western rattlesnakes are a lot more high-strung, right? Our kind of woodland ones are more sedate, right? And that kind of plays into that trade-off that it pays to hold still, don't move. You know, something. I'll tell you when we get out. I'll tell you the story once we walk out. Yes. We do. They're very. Yep. I've never seen one over here. I've seen them in Cowley County on private land, but I've never seen one in the land between the lakes. I'm sorry. The question was, do we have to leave house? We do. And that's a project that I'm currently working on, and I'm working on a project on pine snakes as well. So it's probably one of the rarest species in Kentucky. Cross. I have. They're very rare, and I mean very, 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 very uncommon.
Are they protected by any laws at all?
That's a good question. So are they protected by any laws? So in the state of Kentucky, if it is private land, then no. In Tennessee, yes. Okay. The state of Tennessee protects them all, but I don't think they really, if somebody's got a rattlesnake that they feel threatened by crossing their yard, that's a tough one to enforce, okay? But here's the thing: in the land between the lakes, they are protected. There is no timber rattlesnake take season for, like there is for deer. Love hunting. One of the founding members of the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Association on campus, right? I love hunting, but there's no take for timber rattlesnakes. So within the land between the lakes, it is illegal to kill them. This is the bane of my existence during the summer months, right? Because I've started to question whether free will exists, because someone will post a picture of a rattlesnake on Facebook and see me on land. And I'm telling myself out loud, do not go read the comments. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And yet I cannot help myself that they're going to do it. So it's kind of interesting things. It is illegal. It's within the legal boundaries of the land.
What are their natural predators besides birds?
Yeah, mostly birds of prey. And I don't care how well people, but mostly birds of prey for the adults. And I don't care how big the rattlesnake is or how quote-unquote bad it looks. A red-tailed hawk can make short order of one really, really fast. I mean, they do not see it coming. They're usually attacked from behind. But interestingly enough, for baby rattlesnakes, one of the biggest predators, and we call them pups, one of the biggest predators on baby rattlesnakes are actually black racers. So when a mama rattlesnake drops a litter on the ground, a single black racer can come in there and just annihilate these babies, right? Which is kind of crazy.
They're alive.
So,
They're alive person.
Like I said, I'm gonna go out there, and if anybody has any questions, you want to talk to me about it more, we certainly can. Let me tell you something really quick though. It's like I kept pointing this out. This is hopefully y'all don't just get up and walk out after this one. So this one's named. I didn't. When I talked about field tags, I give them, instead of using their numbers because it's confusing, we just give them colloquial names. We're like, oh, we gotta go get Gus next. Right, that's Gus. And this is Alan. Anything now, that was Neil. There's Patton. And I had one on there, but I had one named Buzz. And I started naming them after Apollo astronauts. You want to know why? Because I think timber rattlesnakes are out of this world.